This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
I asked her more questions, I just said, because she had told me that she was a month pregnant. When she found out she was pregnant, she was a month pregnant, and she just left town, left her job, and got back together with my dad. She didn't tell my dad for like another couple of weeks that she was pregnant. And so I said, but Dad's a smart man. Like, didn't he go to the doctor's appointments with you and do the math?
Yeah.
She said, well, yeah, he went to the doctor's appointments with me, but you have to remember that back then the fathers didn't go in the rooms with the mothers. So that told me she fudged the due date for my dad, right?
And you were early.
And I was early. Right. If you look at my baby book, my due date is March 1st, and I was born February 15th.
Imagine spitting into a tube, sending off your DNA, and unknowingly turning your life upside down. For me and thousands of others, this is our reality. I'm your host, Alexis Auerselt. In July of 2021, I discovered that I am an NPE, someone who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. This podcast shares the journeys of people who were shocked by a DNA discovery, mostly through modern DNA testing. We're telling the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. This is DNA Surprises.
DNA surprises are, by definition, surprises. But sometimes there are murmurs and suspicions long before a DNA test confirms the truth. In this week's episode, Liann shares how she uncovered her mother's secret long before she took a test. She talks about how she's navigated her journey so far, including rejection from her biological father. She also reflects on how her admiration for her raised father has only grown in light of her DNA surprise. Thank you for sharing your story, Liann.
My name is Liann. I am almost 50. I'll be 50 next month. Thank you, Alexis, for having me on and for everything that you do. First of all, I know everybody says that to you, but I wanted to make sure I also included that because your work is amazing with
Thank you.
The podcast. So I'll start with my family of origin and just sort of what that looked like as a backdrop. I grew up with my mom and dad, and then 2 older sisters who were 10 and a half and 8 years older than me. So much of the time at home, I was sort of an only child. My oldest sister went away to college when I was 7, and my middle sister moved away out of the house when I was like early junior high. But my early childhood memories kind of focus around my mom taking me to dance lessons and swim lessons and gymnastics classes. And, she was involved in Girl Scouts with me. And then, of course, there was always that middle sister that teased me all the time that I was adopted or that I was the mailman's daughter because I do look a little different than my sisters. And into junior high, I was then sort of an only child, quote unquote, in my household. And then around that time, both of my parents started getting sick. And my mom was diagnosed with MS. And soon after that, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And much around the same time, My dad was also having heart issues where he required a heart valve replacement and then ultimately had to have a heart transplant. So he did receive the heart in 1989 and survived a month shy of 16 years. So we did get him for many years, get to have him in our lives for many years after that, which, very thankful for. He got to see me graduate high school. He got to see me graduate college. He got to see all of his grandkids. With that said, my dad and I have a very close connection. And for the purposes of everybody knowing, when I say my dad, I'm referring to my dad who raised me. So my dad who raised me is my dad. And I'm getting chills as I say this, but he is my dad. So my, and instead of, I don't even feel comfortable calling him my birth certificate father. Like he's my dad. My bio father will be bio father. So, very close connection with my dad. And I'd always called him my hero. He was always my hero with everything he had to fight through with his health, and also then taking care of my mom. They took care of each other back and forth in their health crises. But a couple very poignant memories in regards to that connection with my dad. They both pertain to him being in the hospital, and both are over my birthday. The first one, he was waiting for his heart, and he was on life support and had, mechanical ventilation. He was, had a tube, and he was half sedated. But somehow, with me standing there, he knew it was my birthday, and he was looking in my eyes, and I could tell that he was telling me happy birthday. I just knew that he was.
Yeah.
That was confirmed after he got better and the tube was removed. So then there was a second time where he was in the hospital. The same thing. He had a surgery, and he was being brought out of a sedated state, and he knew it was my birthday and just kind of told me happy birthday. And it was just, it's just one of those connections I've always had with him.
And so you never suspected that he was not your biological father growing up. You had a really strong bond. And aside from the jokes with your sister, you had no idea.
No idea. It's kind of funny when I say I didn't have any idea, because I did ask questions, right? And maybe those questions were spearheaded by being teased by my sister. But I do have memories after everything starts coming back, right? You start thinking of things and things start making sense. I do have memories of when, I was 6 or 7, sitting on the bed with my mom, and I asked my mom, "Is Dad my dad?" And she said, "Of course he is." I remember jumping up on my dad's lap at one point, and maybe about the same age. And I said, just thinking, I remember the thought in my head was just because of the age difference between my two sisters and myself. That was my thought at the time. But I asked him, "Dad, was I a mistake?" And he said, "No, honey, you were a surprise." So I had those kinds of questions, but never in a way that I didn't belong or I was out of place or I felt like the black sheep of the family.
Right.
So
interesting. But interesting that your young self at such a young age almost seemed to pick up on something, even though you weren't treated differently and you were very close with your dad. So interesting. Through
my teen years then, though, my relationship with my mom did become a very contentious relationship. They were obviously very focused on themselves and their health from the time I was probably 13, 14 years old until I was about 18, 19 years old, where they were both in and out of the hospital taking care of health crises. And I was in high school and having to get myself from school place to practices and things like that. And so, I was kind of raising myself at that time. And by the time their health was sort of returning back to normal, I was being treated by my mom like I was still 14, because that's where she still had me in her mind, right? So But by that time, I was 19 years old and I was dating somebody that she didn't like. And at 19 years old, she kicked me out of the house, basically because I was a teenager making a bad decision and getting back together with a boyfriend who cheated on me. And she didn't like that. So she kicked me out of the house at 19. But it was a few months before I was going away to college. In 1996, I went away to college. But I do want to touch a little bit on the resemblance. I have dark curly hair. I have hazel eyes. Both of my sisters and both of my parents have blue eyes and lighter hair. When I was really young and I look at pictures of my mom pregnant with me, she did have darker hair, but not this dark, not dark brown. But both of my sisters are blonder. And again, everybody in my family has blue eyes.
Did that spark any questions for you?
I was always told I looked like my aunt, right? There was, again, I was that person in the family that was told you look like somebody else. And my aunt was my dad's sister. So she had a little bit of darker hair and she had green eyes. So I always was told that I resembled her. And I think that was just something my mom lucked out on, right? Like that was something that they could just kind of fall back on.
Yeah. There's always some relative that's not in the immediate family that, oh, you look like that person. Yeah,
right.
We hear that a lot, right?
In 1996, I graduated from college. I stayed in the area for a couple years where I went to school to kind of wean myself away from the college life. But during that time, during those couple years, I started having seizures. And I was diagnosed with epilepsy during that time. So this is probably about 25. I was dealing with that. And then my roommate was graduating from college and I didn't feel comfortable living on my own. So I ended up moving in with my older sister and her family. Obviously I wonder what must have been running through my mom's mind when I started having seizures. If she even thought about, there is somebody in my mom's family, a great aunt that has seizures, but who knows?
Right.
You never know. So in 1998, I'm living with my sister and her family, my oldest sister. And I remember sitting at the dining room table, just having a conversation. And out of the blue, I don't even remember what the conversation was about. But out of the blue, she just says, well, when mom and dad were divorced, blah, 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 blah. And I said, what do you mean when mom and dad were divorced? And she said, oh, you didn't know? And I said, no, what? And she told me then that my mom and dad were divorced for 3 years before I was born.
Wow. What did you think at that point, hearing that?
I didn't know what to think. She had told me bits and pieces of what she could remember. At the time, she was like 7 to 10 when they were divorced. She told me that she remembers going to see dad in a different city and spending weekends with him. And she remembers another man that my mom dated for a couple years, but it was only the first 2 of the 3 years. So that man obviously wasn't. And he also had blue eyes, so that wasn't anything to think about as far as that goes. But it still wasn't even anything. I don't even think somebody else being my biological father was even a true thought at that point, because even after my sister told me that, I just really remember only asking myself, what were the circumstances of my conception between my mom and dad, right? Did they get pregnant with me and then get back together? Or did they get back together and then get pregnant with me? Which scenario happened first? And that was really what my thought process was wrapped around. Not so much about whether or not anybody else was truly involved.
Right. Because our brains just don't go there. Right. You start making sense of it in a way that stays true to your reality, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so you learned this major information. Do you talk to your parents about that?
I don't. Sort of perpetuating that family cycle or that programming where we keep secrets or we don't talk about things. Number one, my mom was I just didn't want them to know that I knew, I guess. I don't know why I didn't feel like they needed to know I knew they were divorced. I just wasn't in that mindset yet where I needed to break those cycles. Another thing my sister told me too in that conversation was she remembered being dropped off to Florida. My cousins, my aunt and uncle, my aunt that I told I resembled, my cousins were my sister's ages. And so my mom and dad dropped them off in Florida for the summer to spend the summer with their cousins. And then when they came back from Florida, my mom had moved them back with my dad. So that all of a sudden they were back together with my dad and living with my dad. So it was just kind of abrupt. She remembers that abruptness in their lives and not being able to say goodbye to their friends in their previous town. And yeah, so that's sort of how that all happened in her memory.
So not a lot of discussion around it. It was kind of mysterious even to your sister.
Yeah. I do remember asking questions to my middle sister and maybe a cousin that I was really close with or an aunt, that was around back then. And nobody really knew anything. They remembered her being divorced, but nobody really knew anything. Then my dad passes away in 2005. After that happened, and I was able to grieve that process, I started then, I think, letting my mind go further into, okay, is there really somebody else? For the next couple of years, I asked myself those questions. The interesting thing is that I was going through therapy during this time too, for other reasons. Obviously, you think in 2005, even now, it's hard to find somebody that understands what this is all about, the NPE situation. But I just didn't, after that, I really just didn't feel like she was able to kind of help me as much with this situation. There were other things that she did help me with, but I didn't get help on this situation from her. I had to ask myself questions. I asked, again, family members more questions about other people, about, nobody knew anything. But of course, then at that point, cousins would say, well, there was, I always wondered, there was, so-and-so, would always say to me. So then I'm starting to feel like the family secret, right? Because people were talking. It's just making you feel like a secret.
Yeah. How did you feel when you started hearing or getting this inkling that you'd been a topic of conversation?
I don't know how to put it in a feeling, but it gave me the goal of my journey in no longer wanting to be the secret. Mm-hmm. Like, I think from the beginning, it's never really been for me about having a father, finding a father, or, maybe a bonus with a connection with siblings, but I had my siblings. So if we found a connection with some other siblings, that could be a bonus, but it was more so about no longer being the secret. And I came to that realization after doing, a lot of work on myself and a lot of journaling and, things like that at a different place further down past 2005. So,
yeah.
So, 2005, my dad passes away and I'm asking lots of questions. And then 2007, the week of my birthday, I'm having a conversation with my middle sister on the phone. And she, I'm asking her questions again, just thinking out loud and things like that. She says to me, well, now that Dad's been gone for a couple years, I guess I can tell you how I feel about the situation. I said, what do you mean? How do you feel about what situation? And she said, well, when I was going to the community college, I had biology and we were learning the Putnam Square, big B, little b, recessive dominant genes. I went up to the teacher after class and I asked him, so what you're saying is two blue-eyed parents can only have a blue-eyed child? And he said, That's exactly what I'm saying. So for 20 years, she carried that with her and never said anything to anybody. So we're both freaking out on the phone. I'm Googling with her on the phone, like paternity eye color percentages, because we're talking 2007. Like there isn't even commercial DNA testing yet. Like I did look up full sibling DNA tests that you could get online. And at that point, they were $500. Like you could get them online, but they were very expensive,
Yeah.
And so my sister had said, I'm here to support you. I'll do whatever you want, whatever you need. She was willing to pay for half of the full sibling DNA test. She was coming up with different routes that I could take to find out different pieces of information. And at this time, my mom was in early kind of more developing into moderate stage of dementia from her MS. And so she was still living in her house from after my dad passing away. She was still in her house. But when my sister was home and not flying as a flight attendant, then my mom would stay at her house. And so one day, probably within a week or two after this conversation, my sister called me and said, Mom's going to be at my house. Do you want me to see if we can get her to admit this? And I said, well, you might as well have a conversation with her because see what she says before we go and spend $500, right? See what she remembers, see what she says. She approaches my mom with the same biology story and Putnam Square and says, is it possible that Dad is not Liann's biological father? And she immediately said, I know he's not.
Wow.
My sister said, how sure are you? And my mom said, I'm 100% sure. So by that time, with all the questions I've asked myself and all the thoughts and things that I've tried to feel, and by that time, I was more shocked that she so readily admitted it than the fact that it was actually true.
Because at this point, do you feel like you'd come to terms with the fact that that was probably the case?
Yeah. After doing my own research with the eye color probability, nowadays with genetic advances, we do know that there is a very slight possibility that two blue-eye parents can't, that's been further investigated and things. So we do know that now. But back then, that's just, you have the Putnam Square, you see big B, little b, and that's just how it's defined, right? See? Mm-hmm. When this came to me, this information of, yes, she admitted it, I was working I had a second job where I was teaching a class at night. And I was just getting ready to go into my class to teach when I got this call. And so after I got this information, I had to go teach class. And so, yeah, I just remember that. I have no idea how I even got through that class, but my class of adult students were the first people that knew this information because
oh my gosh, so you told your class.
I had to go in there because I was in such a panic and freaked out state that I just had to be like, okay, you guys, I'm going to do my best to teach the class, but this is the information I just found out. So be patient with me.
So you taught your class and just got through.
Yeah. And then I left and I called my mom on the way home. And so I had, lots of questions, obviously. And she answered them to her best ability. I truly feel like everything I asked, she answered honestly, as much as she could remember with her dementia, and probably what she blacked out because of the abrupt change in her life and just moving on with getting her life back together with my dad. And my mom was the love of my dad's life. And so I'm sure for those 3 years, that's all he ever wanted was his family back together, and when she ran back to him, it was no question to him. The things that she could remember about my biological father was that he had dark curly hair.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Yeah, just like you. Yes.
He had darker eyes. He was from the Philadelphia area, but he would fly into the Chicago area because he worked for the same company my mom worked for. So he would fly into that office every couple weeks or whatever. And he was Jewish. And he was married with at least one other daughter. They dated, quote unquote, for about 6 months, but she couldn't remember a name.
So you're taking all this information in. You learned that now you have Jewish lineage. Mm-hmm. Did you think about that at all during that time, or were you more focused on who he was?
I think I was more focused on who he was at that point.
Yeah, the cultural piece is a whole other thing to unpack, right?
It really is. It really is. Which I'm not sure I've truly done, to be honest, yet. Which is, you know, another thing I'm working on among many.
Sure. It's lifelong, right? Did your mom express any remorse or anything when you spoke to her?
No, I would not say remorse was anything I felt. I never felt remorse from her for kicking me out of the house either. She feels like if she was in the right, that she did the right thing. You know, I made the right decision. You know, that's just how. Now, with that said, looking back on all of this and even through different periods of time, even then, in the beginning, never had anger. I was never angry with my mom because I feel like she made the right decision in getting her family back together. I had the best dad in the world that I could have had. I can't say that looking back on the circumstances she was in and the time period that it was, that if I was in her shoes, that I wouldn't have made the same decision. Did I have anger about the timing of finding out and how it came out? I had to process that too. And I don't think I ever had anger for that either, because I don't think I would have wanted to look my dad in the eyes with this knowledge. I don't think either of us would have wanted to look each other in the eyes with this knowledge.
Do you think he knew?
That was always a big question for me. You know, interestingly enough, I have talked to a very, very good medium who did confirm for me that yes, he did know. And they could not have the very difficult conversation that would have needed to have been had and still go on with their marriage. They just couldn't have had, their marriage couldn't have withstood having that very difficult conversation. So they had to go on with living with the unsaid. And that's just how they worked.
Okay. Wow.
Which makes perfect and total sense.
So you have this conversation with your mom. You learn some details about your biological father. What do you do next?
The following years were still prior to me doing the DNA testing and really kind of having that fear of the security and privacy issues that surrounded that. You know, it's still fairly new on the market. And, you know, I work in healthcare, so privacy concerns like that are always on my mind. Before I decided to take the test, you know, still all these memories are coming out of the woodwork, like things that you don't even, like, how did I not think about this? They just slap you in the face, right? I had one of those memories, and it's so it's so funny because of how my sister told me about this. One of my memories that completely slapped me in the face was I was in college, and don't ask me why I didn't make this connection in the couple other times I learned the Putnam Square myself, but I was in my anatomy and physiology class in college, which was a lecture hall of people. And the professor standing in front of the class doing the whole Putnam Square again. And he says in front of the class, so this means two blue-eyed parents can only have a blue-eyed child. And I raised my hand in front of the lecture hall of class. And I said, well, I know that's not true because both of my parents have blue eyes and I don't. And he said, you might want to talk to somebody about that. And just went on with the lecture.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I remember walking out of that class thinking, okay, this teacher has no idea what he's talking about. Like, because mind you, this was before I moved into with my sister and before I found out, that they were divorced.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, my parents have been married for 30, 35. What does he touch? He doesn't know. So yeah, so those kinds of memories during this time are all coming back to me, and just sort of, the memories of, asking those questions when I was younger. It was finally in 2017 when I really started, I guess, realizing that my urge to know answers was stronger than my fear of the privacy issues that could potentially be out there. And I think I always knew in the back of my mind that I would eventually do it. I would know the timing, when the timing was right to do it.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, I decided to do, it was like end of 2017. So beginning of 2018 is when I got my 23andMe results. I did 23andMe first because of the health component, because I did know I was Jewish. And I knew that considering breast health, if you're Ashkenazi Jewish, that increases your breast cancer risk. So I wanted to include that health component with that, knowing that even if it was negative, it could still, they only look at certain components of the health, the DNA. So, but luckily, it did come back negative, and but it did confirm that I was Ashkenazi Jewish, and I was 50%. So that confirmed for me that my biological father was 100% Jewish. It also confirmed for me that my mom had that memory right. So everything else she remembered back then was probably correct.
Now, did you have any matches when you took the test?
I did not have any significant close matches. No, I had like second to third cousins and higher. I let a few months go on, sitting on that, kind of feeling the feels about, how I'm feeling with that information, and how I'm feeling with no matches, and how I would feel if there were matches. And I made a decision, okay, I think I want to do Ancestry. Oh, and at this time I'm joining Facebook support groups, and I'm doing more research, and I'm finding out the NPE terminology and, digging in that way too. So I decided that I wanted to do Ancestry to sort of widen my net. Christmas of 2018, my boyfriend got me the Ancestry kit, and I sent that in pretty much right away. I got the results. I can't remember exactly when I got the results. I remember waking up at 5:00 in the morning on a weekend. And, I just can't sleep, so I'll just get up and sit on the couch and watch TV. But I noticed I got my results. So I opened up my results. There's my aunt. I see my aunt. I know who my aunt is. And there's somebody underneath her that says close relative to first cousin. And it has a first name and a bunch of letters and numbers, right?
Like a username. Yeah.
Like dug deeper into Ancestry and found, the relative examples that it could be. And I think oh my gosh, okay, so this person is somebody I don't know. Like, so I'm freaking out at 5 o'clock in the morning. There's nobody I can call. My boyfriend is in bed sleeping. I can't like even jump up and down and scream. Like I'm even kind of shaking right now talking about it because I'm feeling all of those, just back there feeling that again, I'm just freaking out, remembering saying that, doing my own research, just kind of wondering what to do with it, sitting on it. It was I can't remember how long I had the information, and I don't see myself sitting on it for very long. But it was in April 5th, 2019, when I sent this close relative match a message on Ancestry. I included some very specific information so that he knew. I tried to walk a thin line. Like, I know there's very sensitive, you need to be very sensitive and very careful. But I also didn't want him to think I was like some scammer, know? So I said it in a way where I was looking for this third party instead of like, I think you're my blah, 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 I'm looking for my paternal half, or I'm looking for my, something, related it back to me. And so I gave him some information that I knew about. Not everything. I didn't spew out everything right away, but he responded like the next day. It wasn't right away that he responded. He responded the next day with some clarifying questions. And then pretty much said, well, Liann, it looks like I'm your older brother.
Wow.
And so now I'm freaking out. I have this half brother. I've never had a brother. Oh my gosh, I have a brother.
Yeah.
What the heck does this mean? We're going back and forth. He provided me some basic information, to confirm that, yes, he believes this is true. But he didn't want to provide a name until he could have a chance to talk to his dad.
So his dad is still alive?
Yes, still alive and still married to the same woman.
Mm.
And they're both still alive. And there's also a half sister who is 14 months older than me.
So how long does it take for him to talk to your biological father and his wife?
Yeah, it takes a few weeks because when I get in contact with him, his parents they were on vacation. And then on the heels of their vacation, my half brother was going to be leaving town. And so it was a few weeks. And in the meantime, he and I were communicating a little back and forth. And he finally ended up having a conversation with his dad on April 22nd. So from the 5th to the 22nd, I'm like freaking out.
Yeah.
Just the anxiety is crazy. I just remember carrying my journal around with me everywhere and just randomly at work having to pull it out and just brain dump because it was just so, I just couldn't focus.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think about blowing somebody's family up. What is this going to do? I've had 15 years to think about this. This is new to them. Like, what is going to happen?
Yeah.
So my half brother responded back to me via Ancestry and said that he's very disappointed to let me know that his dad did not want to pursue it. And, I think by that point I was prepared for that response because I had found out that he was still married. I obviously knew sort of a lot of his background by now.
Yeah, right.
I'm sure my mom wasn't the only one. He traveled a lot for work, and the half brother used to work with him. So he was around too, right? So he knows a lot of his dad's secrets, I'm sure. But at that point in time, my half brother did agree to still keep communication open. We agreed to have a phone conversation at that point. But with that agreement, I feel like I felt still a little put off, even in that agreement. Like he wanted to, but yet didn't want to go against his dad's wishes.
Right.
Now that he knew what his dad's wishes were. And so every time we would make plans to have a call, something would come up, or then he was going to be on another road trip, or, then finally, when we were finally able to have the conversation, he was only going to be available for a couple hours. So it was like, okay, let's do this now.
Yeah.
And I gave him my phone number, and he called me from a private number.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a brief 30-minute conversation, and he told me how the conversation with his dad went. And it was a very brief. He told him, asked his dad, do you remember, gave him my mom's name. And he said, oh, yeah, I remember her. Very surprised and was like, oh, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, Dad, it looks like you have another daughter. And there was silence. And then he changed the subject. So he continued the conversation a little bit with his dad, brought the conversation then back to me eventually, and said, what do you want to do about this? And he said, I just want to leave it alone.
How do you feel about that? I mean, you said you'd kind of expected it, but how did it feel when you talked to your brother and got that confirmation?
I was sad. I felt a ping of hurt. Of course that's hurtful. The thing that I wasn't prepared for that hurt even more was to be asked to keep it a secret from the half sister until at least after their parents were no longer around. Here I was still being kept a secret.
Yeah.
That's what really hurt. I sat with that for a while. I did my own digging. I dug further into the first ancestry, finding the last name. My half brother wouldn't give me the last name, so I dug further into ancestry, found the last name. Then I dug into Facebook, and I'm finding more. I'm finding pictures, and I find a picture of my biological father, and took my breath away when I looked at my eyes for the first time. And I didn't even expect to have that response, because I do have, there is some maternal resemblances, but I didn't expect to have that kind of response to the eyes. Taking screenshots, I'm screenshotting everything. And I just, putting everything into a folder on my phone and just trying to dig things up, doing my own healing with this information. What can I do with this? How do I feel about this? Sitting with it, talking to people in the support group, and just trying to figure out, finally coming to the terms with, this is my journey. This is my story. And it's okay to do with this information what I feel like is right for me, regardless of what they think.
Right.
And ultimately, she does have a right to know the truth and do with what she feels is right for her.
Mm-hmm.
If any of my siblings found another sibling and didn't tell me about it, I would be livid.
Yeah. Yeah.
I sat on it for a couple years. It took me a good couple years to, because I came to terms with the fact that I would reach out to her, but then I had to feel like I needed to be in the right mind space to be okay handling rejection again.
Yeah.
I had to get myself to making the decision of this is what I'm going to do. And then I had to get myself to the point of, okay, if this is how it goes, I'm okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
I had her on Facebook. So I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to do it. And I had one of my friends, kind of read through it and help me edit the message, and a friend that I was with at the time that I sent the message for support. And, I didn't hesitate once I had it typed out. I didn't hesitate. I just hit send. But I told her a little bit of who I was, and I mentioned the half brother's name, so she didn't think I was like some scammer again, right? Like, so I didn't want to throw him under the bus, but I also wanted her to know that, okay, yes, this is how I connected, right? That was September 2021. So September 1st, because we're not friends on Facebook, she didn't see the message right away.
Yeah.
So it was then September 11th as she responded. I'm a big number person, right? So there's the ones, September 1st and September 11th. So I'm like, oh my gosh. But her response was very much like, this is very surprising. I'm in shock. I'll need some time, but oh my gosh, I have a sister, sort of a response.
Yeah.
So I was just like, of course, I completely understand. Take some time, She took a few days, 2 or 3 days, which was, I thought she'd need more time, but then by that time she started having questions, right? So she'd reach out to me for different questions, and I would tell her, and I will answer whatever I have the answers to. I will tell you the answer, So we were talking back and forth, getting to know each other, figured out we drive the same exact car. Like, it's crazy. Like we do have a lot in common. There are very much similarities. We were sharing pictures back and forth, a lot of similarities when we were kids. And some similarities between what I look like as a child and what her girls look like. And so we were, comparing things like that. And then November 2021, her and her husband were taking a long vacation, a long weekend to Washington, D.C., and actually invited me and my boyfriend to go out there and meet them.
Wow.
So I was like, oh my gosh. Well, my boyfriend couldn't make it because of work, but I was like, I am not missing this opportunity.
Yeah.
I had lost contact with the half brother. He sort of was, I'm guessing, protecting his mom, protecting his dad's secrets, abiding by what his dad wanted. I took her up on it. I went out to Washington, D.C. They picked me up at the airport. They paid for my hotel room. Like, they met me with such welcome, open arms. We got to know each other, toured Washington, D.C. Now, I say we got to know each other and exchanged a lot of stories, but I still felt walls.
Sure.
There were still walls and reservations and things. A lot of things she was dealing with, right? And of course, I was very much in the front of my mind was, okay, for me, this is the culmination of 14 years.
Yeah, yeah.
But for her, this is like brand new information. So I was still very, very sensitive to that and not wanting to be so overwhelming or, just wanting to take things at her pace, whatever she was comfortable with. Yeah, so that was just a long weekend, and they were driving back home sooner than I needed to be at the airport, and they just sort of dropped me off near where I could walk to the Lincoln Memorial, which is where the reflection pool is. So I'm walking around that area and just like literally reflecting in awe of what just happened that weekend, and, wondering if and when I'll ever get to see her again, because, she's got a lot of emotions she's dealing with on her end. She had mentioned that she wasn't planning on having a conversation with her dad about it. She was very upset with her dad about it because of how he responded. And if he had already given that kind of response, she's more concerned with her mom, which I understand. And it's been a year since we met. So that was November 2021. And we're still in some contact. I would say that sort of died down a little bit. We still are in communication via Facebook. I have her number from the trip, but I don't text her because her girls don't know yet, doesn't want to give them a different outlook on their grandfather. And yeah, so that's been a year. I am content because I feel like I reached my goal.
Yeah.
I'm no longer the secret. And what they now do with that information is on them.
Yeah.
How else would you describe where you are right now in your journey?
It's a work in progress, right? Like, so I'm in a place where now instead of trying to find the answers of my biology, I'm trying to find doing the inner child work and the shadow work, and, to tie into, my Jewish heritage. There's a whole other ancestral trauma thing that goes along with that, and so I've just been starting to do a lot of that work on myself too. And that's something that is up on my vision board to get deeper on this year. And so that's sort of where I am currently. There have been a couple big realizations that I've had pertaining to my mom and my dad throughout my journey, and different points of time that I've realized different things. Biggest thing that I've realized in regards to my dad is how much of a hero he actually was in my life. And I always called him and didn't even realize how much of a hero he was.
Yeah.
And getting the response that I got from my biological father proved even more to me the kind of man that my dad actually was.
And that's beautiful, that he knew, and to hear the relationship as you describe it with him is really special.
And I honestly feel like it's gotten even stronger through all of this. I feel him with me all the time. I mentioned briefly the medium earlier that I spoke with. Immediately he came through saying, "You're my daughter, you're my daughter, you're my daughter." He just needs to make that, he just truly needs to make that clear. There's no question.
You mentioned you had two big kind of takeaways. What's the other one?
Yes. So for my mom, I kind of made the connection back to when I was 19 and getting kicked out of the house. I feel like that was a huge moment in her life where she was subconsciously or consciously being faced with her own demons in her past that she couldn't deal with. And that's why I got kicked out. Because of the whole cheating link. And so I came, that was something that I healed from in kind of having an understanding, if you will, not being able to forgive her for that. And so that was something that I healed from through this. And another thing is I do feel very, very lucky in reading a lot of other people's stories that my mom actually told me the truth that she was able to tell.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe she didn't know a name, maybe she couldn't tell me everything, but she didn't try to perpetuate the lie.
That's true.
And like I said, I don't know if I would have made the same decisions if I wasn't in her shoes back in the day. So I was lucky also enough to have a lot of this healing. My mom just passed away in July of 2022. So while I do have this layer of this journey on my grief process, I was lucky enough to have a lot of this sort of information before she passed, and healing before she passed, and conversations with her, even if it was for myself in her dementia, with her before she passed.
I admire your patience because it spread out over a really long time. And I think for those of us who take Ancestry or 23andMe tests or MyHeritage, any of those, we're able to get more immediate answers and really dive in. And the internet, I feel like, is even more vast than it was, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. So it's remarkable to hear your journey over this span of time.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
What advice do you have for a parent who is keeping a DNA surprise from their child?
I would have to say that the truth will come out, number one. So being honest with your child from the beginning is of utmost importance. Age appropriate, obviously. it's okay to have a not very good story to communicate to your child and teach your child the perseverance it takes to get through a situation, right? Even now, I say, even I'm thankful that I didn't know when my dad was alive, but I think that maybe that could have been different if I was communicated that from the very beginning, right? Maybe I would have a different perspective of that if I did know from the very beginning. But once I got older, I think of if I would have found out at 18 or 25, I was 35 when I found out after he passed away. So it's either, just do it as early as possible, as age appropriate as possible.
And what advice do you have for someone who just discovered that they're an NPE?
Number one, whatever you're feeling is so valid. That's the first thing, because people will try to tell you otherwise. People will try to tell you how you should be feeling, or you shouldn't feel this way, or you're still the same person, or, well, apparently, yes, I'm the same person, but I truly never knew who that was.
Yeah.
Or nothing has changed. Yes, nothing has changed, but everything has changed. So in my journey, I've tried to take a step back and take that into an educational opportunity where I'll explain something like comments like that have a visceral response to us, much like when somebody who loses a loved one too soon and hears they're in a better place. Because to that person who lost that loved one, it's not true. It's the same kind of visceral response when we hear those things.
Yeah.
So I just kind of try to take that as an educational opportunity. Journal. Carry it around with you. Brain dump. Therapy is important, and finding the right one is important. And also, I think what's important is don't let your physicians tell you that it doesn't matter. I hear stories all the time how physicians, oh, okay, well, we'll just delete your history, no big deal. But they don't realize the trauma that the patient in front of them is just going through. And so I think that there's a lot of education, not only to therapists for this NPE world that we have now, but also physicians need to also know the sensitivity surrounding this, and that it's not as easy as just erasing somebody's paternal history in their medical record and being fine with it.
Yeah. Well, especially as you mentioned, all the medical implications for you with your Jewish ancestry.
Yeah.
Just, things that you have to be aware of. So 100%, that's great advice. Well, Liann, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I'm so glad we had the chance to connect and that you've been able to connect with some parts of your newfound family. And I hope that those connections continue to grow and that you find peace in your journey.
Thank you so much, Alexis. And I can't wait to meet you in March.
Yes. I'll see you at the Untangling Our Roots Summit.
Thanks again to Liann for sharing her story. If you have a DNA surprise story that you'd like to share, please email dnasurprises@gmail.com. Until next time.